Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Darin Duin with me. Darin is a certified estate planner and he is the founder and CEO of CapitalSmart Tax Strategies. And one of the things I think you're going to hear about his journey today is when you really press into the things that you have passion for, you can see great results. So, Darin, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
Yeah. So to start your journey, growing up, your dad would go to different estate sales, and at some point, you either asked or had to go along with him, and that opened your eyes to the world of estates. So talk a little bit about those early days and going with your dad.
Yeah, so it was the late 70s, and if you look back to see what the federal estate tax was, and there were estate sales going on everywhere. This is agriculture country in western Minnesota, and I had no idea what was going on, but that's essentially how you would prospect for new clients with these estate sales. So I didn't understand it, but one thing that has always stuck out with me and just you don't know what's going to go on, you don't know what's going to happen. I do remember him on one of those old walkie-talkie phones saying, "We will never see single digit interest rates again." For some
Mm,
reason, that's just always stuck out, and this has to be early 80s. So
yeah.
it was interesting, and I didn't understand it, but I certainly understand it now with, the relationships I have with land auctioneers that are generally selling large plots of land to pay the federal estate tax. So in a
hmm
little bit, full circle, even though I didn't really understand at the time, I certainly understand it now. Good times with my dad.
Amazing. So as you're growing up, you find a passion in sports and become involved in them at a very high level. So talk a little bit about the progression for you. Football ends up being your number one sport, but talk a little bit about, the young years of getting involved and then really finding a passion and a love for football.
Yeah. So actually, my favorite sport growing up was hockey.
Okay.
Western Minnesota.
Yeah.
I was going to be Wayne Gretzky when I grew up, and I figured out um, probably about my sophomore year, this isn't probably going to work out because we were good. My hockey club was in Moorhead, and we were good. But then you'd go to the Iron Range, or you'd go to Minneapolis, and we'd lose 18-1, 19-1, probably could have been worse. And it was funny as later on as I got into college and a little bit later, you'd watch any random NHL game. It was like, okay, I played against this guy, I played against this guy. And it's just probably about my sophomore year, I figured out this isn't going to work. And I focused on football and track after that.
Yeah.
And I played baseball, loved baseball growing up. But then right around the same time, actually, figured out I couldn't hit a curveball at all. And it's not like this was, Max Scherzer or Clayton Kershaw throwing curveballs. These are
Yeah.
16-year-olds throwing curveballs, and I couldn't hit them. So it's like, okay, stick with track, and I'll stick with football. And eventually, about my junior year, I started to get pretty good attention with both track and football. And when I signed at Nebraska, the original plan was for me to run track as well as play
Okay.
football. But after that first year, it was like, okay, I need a break from all this, and I'm not going to run track. But I did end up playing football 4 years at Nebraska.
Yeah. So what about Nebraska? I mean, obviously it was a good time, a good leader in Tom Osborne, but what about Nebraska brought you from
Yeah.
Minnesota to Nebraska? I mean, I'm sure you had many options.
Yeah, actually, University of Minnesota was one of them. Someone just wrote a book about Nebraska football and did an interview with them just about your journey and story. And my first visit to Minnesota, Lou Holtz was actually still the coach who just passed
Oh,
away.
wow.
I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know if this is going to work out because he's way more interested in the Masters tournament than he is in talking to me. And Don Morton was the coach at North Dakota State, and I knew him from going to camps there. And then he ended up being the coach at Wisconsin while I was in high school. So I looked at them and Iowa with Hayden Fry, but at that time when Tom Osborne calls you, and I remember we were just eating dinner and my mom answered the phone. There's no cell phones in 1987,
Yeah.
and she says there's somebody on the phone for you. Okay, whatever. And it was Tom Osborne. So when he called and said, "Hey, We like you. We think you can play down here. That was the ultimate game changer. Before then, I was a little stressed out. I was like, damn, I'm not feeling it here. I'm not feeling it there. But those bright red uniforms just they had me hooked. And great
Yeah.
experience, great teammates. And Ron Brown was my coach, wide receiver coach at Nebraska. Great influence on me in my life, and I actually saw him not that long ago. So that's how it was actually a pretty once Nebraska entered the picture, a pretty simple decision.
I love it. Now, college athletics is a tough thing. I mean, there's a lot of excitement around it, right? But then you get there and you're like, holy smokes, like, I mean, this is a job. So talk a little bit about that transition for you from, high school athletics to college, and then also just, that next echelon of what it takes to be good, at the collegiate level.
It didn't take long, Phil, to figure out that this is a whole different deal.
Yeah.
I remember my first days. So in my recruiting class, our recruiting class was absolutely loaded. So I tell people one of the players I was competing with, same position, was Tyrone Hughes, who was the Louisiana High School Player of the Year, and ended up being the kick return in the NFC for 2 years in a row. So it's like,
Wow.
okay, there's a gear here. I don't care how much I lift. I don't care how much I stretch. This is not going to, it's just a different gear where guys are they're at full speed on
Yeah.
step one. It's just like,
Yeah.
and until you're on the field with it, you really don't understand it. So, it was, I was, you know, I think I ended up having 8 or 9 gold medals in high school, but so did everybody else.
Yeah.
And it was just, day one was an eye-opening experience. I talk about Mike Grant a lot, who was in my recruiting class. Uh, he was just as good. He was probably better the first day that he was there that he was. He just didn't, some guys are just peaked out
Yeah.
by the time they get in Nebraska. But Lance Lewis and, we had all kinds of NFL players that I ended up playing with. But no, it did not take long to figure out that this is going to be a different deal. So, but that's in probably what I need, what I want most people to understand. They're like, okay, who is the best player you played against or played with or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone listening remembers the 1988. Here's my Allen Fieldhouse glare from my office again, but the 1988 game with Oklahoma State was just, I think we're up 14-0, like 20 seconds into the game, something like that's great. But
Wow.
I remember sitting on the sideline and seeing Barry Sanders play, and it was just everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!" I mean, it's like again, until you're on the field with it, you just don't get it. And we had NFL players all over the field, all over the defense, and there were like little
Yeah.
kids out there trying to lasso this guy. So to this day, I tell people, look, there is a massive difference between your average college football player, me, and someone that goes on to play 10 years in the NFL. We're barely playing the same sport. We might both have helmets on, but it comes to a screeching halt right there.
That's amazing. Now, as you're getting coached by, great coaches like Tom Osborne, Rob Brown, were there any one or two just interesting like leadership principles that really stood out to you that, you've kind of carried on with you throughout your adult life?
Great question. First day, 2 rules. Coach Osborne said there are 2 rules: be on time and tell the truth.
Mm,
Basically, and if you think about that, if you give someone 20 different rules, you're gonna it's some of that's gonna get lost in the cracks. If you're
yeah.
just on time, and believe me, if you were late to a meeting at Nebraska and with Nebraska, that was a felony. My
Yeah.
freshman year, we got to Miami, we had our first team meeting, and 2 players walked in maybe 30, 45 second late. After the meeting, they were excused and they were on the next plane back to Lincoln. So be
Wow.
on time. That was a felony if you were not on time for something. Be on time and tell the truth. And
Yeah.
Coach Osborne said, look, some of you may get in trouble academically. You may get in trouble with the law. You may get in trouble elsewhere. If you just tell us the truth, we will work with you and you will try to help. We will try to help you.
Mm,
If you
yeah.
don't tell us the truth, if you lie to us, you're on your own. So those are things that I've carried with me. And you'll notice
Yeah.
how many meetings you go to where someone walks in late and they give this just banquet of excuses. Nobody cares that your car wouldn't start. Nobody cares that there was traffic or that you had to wait in line at Starbucks. Nobody cares. Just apologize briefly and move on. And
Yep.
obviously, and I've tried to implement that with my children. Do not be late for curfew. If curfew is 11 o'clock, that doesn't mean 11:02. It means 11 o'clock. And by all
Yep.
means, tell the truth. So those are the two
Amazing.
things. And, above and beyond all football experiences, those are the things that are probably I've taken with me.
That's great. Well, and I think one of the points that you made is really, important that, yeah, you can have 20, 30 different rules, but it's like the number 19 may not be as important as number one is then, right? And you start reading into that, like, well, we don't really talk about the 19th most important one. We
Yeah.
only talk about the top five. So de facto, I started discounting or not crediting that one enough. But I think the other part is both of those items, if I boiled it down to those two things, if I'm doing them both, then it probably alleviates a lot of the other issues that can be caused due to not following
No
rule
question.
one, rule two.
No question. If those are two pretty, if you can handle both of those, you're going to handle just about everything else. So, again, when you're 18 years old, you don't, whatever, I'll just make sure I'm on time for this. And,
Yep.
I'll be honest with them, but those are things that I've carried with me now, you know, 36 years later. Unbelievable.
Amazing, amazing. So you pointed out, hey, I started to notice as games are being played that there's maybe a difference between my level of future football potential and Barry Sanders' future football potential.
Yeah.
So I'm sure at some point you start thinking, all right, well, what's the career going to be for me? So talk a bit about that path for you of saying, all right, there's going to be life after football in a different type of a career than football. What is it that I want to do?
Yeah. So I've told this story a lot. It was November of my sophomore year. We were practicing in the stadium, and I was on the punt team. And I was running down to cover the punt during this drill and practice, and it just hit me that you are not going to play in the NFL. And so maybe it's time to start showing a little ambition outside of playing football and chasing girls.
Yeah.
This does not look good on a resume. So I don't know why then. It just hit me. It just hit me then. I mean, I clearly could see it before. I would go against Bruce Pickens every day in practice, who was the third player taken in the draft, not a third round pick, the third player taken in the draft. I mean, we are not similar in terms of athleticism.
Yeah.
So I actually ended up getting I didn't think about my dad. I just trying to get something on paper. And I got an internship through the football office, through the academic counselors at Northwestern Mutual. And I worked there in the summers and, just tried to get something on paper that looked, halfway decent. And
Yeah.
then as it turns out, that's the career I went into, and it's the same career I've been in my entire professional life.
Amazing. So as are getting your feet wet in the world of, finances, financial planning, insurance planning, there's a lot of reasons that people don't make it in that industry. But I think one of the main reasons people do make it in that industry is probably something you learned from your sports, and that is resiliency, right? I mean, like, hey, I'm not going to catch every pass thrown. I'm not going to win every game.
For
But
sure.
what's most important is that I show up the next player. I show up the next day and I put in the effort, which is something that is paramount in the career that you chose. So talk a little bit about some of those similarities that maybe you started to notice between the sports world and then the career that you selected.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have been more clueless entering the professional world in the area of life insurance with Northwestern Mutual. In my first few days of training, I kept hearing this word premium. I'm like, premium? What's premium? What does that mean? And I was easily, when I was internship, easily the worst intern in the history of Northwestern Mutual because I did nothing as far as work, but I kept reading this. I had access to this book called The Client Building System from
Yeah.
Graham. And I was like, okay, to your point, okay, I can definitely call this many people to get this many appointments to get this many sales. I might not know what this means. I might not know what whole life or term or premium or any of this other stuff means, but I definitely can make this many phone calls. And I just went into it with blind faith and stupidity and
Yeah.
just with that client building system, just just using that as my tool to move forward. And I think I may have told you this before, and I got a lot of attention my first year because I ended up my first 7 years at Northwestern, I ended up averaging 90 new clients every year, which if you could do 50, you were considered a hero. And I ended up, the least amount of policies I ever wrote was 303 in a calendar year, and I topped out at 440 one year. Well, it wasn't because I understood the science of life insurance. I just understood the science of picking up the phone and calling people. And the art of referrals, I started to
Mhm.
get really, really, really good at. With Northwestern, you're trained to go get the young associate lawyers. They're not making much money, but they have good, steady jobs. And I would always, if you go into a law firm, there was always the boards of all the lawyers behind the reception desk or something close, and so whoever I was seeing, I would let them know that, hey, it's kind of important as a salesperson that I figured out pretty early that I need to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what do you think? And I always use very careful phraseology. I'm not asking for your permission at this point to use your name or anything like that. Just what do you think of this person? I would always go to the person on top of their name and the person below their name because they probably came in right around the same time. And they'd say, well,
Yeah.
whatever, call them or don't call them or whatever. And then I would just keep going. And at the end, I would say, when I call these people, would you have any objections if I'd mentioned that I had visited with you? And however many years of doing this, never once did I have anybody say, no, yeah, I'm going to object to that. It's just, they don't even think about it. And
Yeah.
I also learned that when I did call people, if I simply said, hey, I'm going to be in your office or I'm going to be over there, my appointment ratio skyrocketed because
Mhm.
it sounds so non-threatening. Oh, you're going to be here. Absolutely. Come by at 1 o'clock. We're accomplishing the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm still so it wasn't uncommon for me to have 25, 30 meetings scheduled on the calendar in a week. And I worked
Yeah.
like an absolute Trojan those first 7 or 8 years that I did this. And then I figured out, okay, you're getting a lot of clients. You're making good money, but you're not making great money. And this is not sustainable moving forward. And I had young children, and it's just like, okay. So then I met Greg Rutherford, who was the president of Taggy Rutherford at a place we probably both shouldn't have been at in March of 2001, but that's okay. That's how you meet people.
Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, this guy's seeing things on a whole different level. To this day, he's still the smartest, most fearless business person that I've ever been around.
Wow.
So, and I just thought, okay, I got to take this next step, and we've got to start doing bigger cases. So I've gone from one opposite of a ton of cases to very just a handful every year, but
Yeah.
usually when they go pretty hard.
So as you're, making that change, I think, we as humans, we talk a lot about breaking bad habits and how difficult it is. And what I found is sometimes breaking habits that did serve me really well, right? I mean, those were good habits you had created those first 7 or 8 years, but unfortunately, they just weren't going to be, as the old phrase goes, what got you here isn't going to get you there habits.
No.
And so breaking that habit can almost be a complete mind you know, mind change, right? Because you're sitting here like, well, gosh, it served me really well. Like I did do really good, and I was getting notoriety for the things I was accomplishing. So talk a bit about just even the mindset shift. I think someone listening right now is saying, "Hey, I'm in a good spot. I don't think I need to make any changes." And it's like, well, the good to great jump is probably in doing something different than how you're already doing it today.
Yeah, I completely abandoned everything that I was doing before. And I just knew that, and I kind of suspected for the last several months the way I was going, it was like, this is not sustainable. I mean, you're working all these hours. If somebody wants to see me at night, I'm there. If somebody wants to see me on a weekend, I'm there. This is not sustainable. And I completely hit a wall, Phil. I mean, there's just no way they would put it. You cannot sustain that level of activity for that many years. And so now it's more of I'm educating people on some of these topics, be it a premium finance case or a life settlement case that are not mainstream topics. I don't like the word expert, but I've become pretty adept in those fields to the point where I can have a conversation in just about any room. And
Yeah.
I do like the education piece, and I love the collaboration with different advisors, lawyers, accountants, trust officers, and it's been far more. I've had 31 death claims, Phil, but the last one is something that is, when you do some of these plans at this level, and I remember this was just this last September, I literally went to see someone at UNMC on their deathbed. And when they can muster up enough strength to extend their hand and thank you for everything you've done for their family, holy hell. That has been above and beyond the paychecks. That has been extraordinarily rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Well,
can't. This is when people are on their deathbed. It ain't the movies. This is not. This is not a pleasant. This is not a pleasant scene. But when they can still muster up the energy to extend their hand, that's why. That's why I do this. Honestly.
absolutely. Well, and I think one of the, hard things in the line of work that you've gone into is it's so delayed gratification, right? Like, what has been implemented is going to be a game-changing event at some day, but oftentimes, you know, clients get caught up in, yeah, but I could have done this trip to Italy instead of, implementing this piece of financial planning. You go, you're right, but I promise you, you in 20 years, you in 2 months, whenever the day happens, right, will be so thankful that you made this decision instead of that one. So talk a
Yes.
little bit about, just conveying that message, but also the delayed gratification part of, the planning and the implementation that people go through.
Yeah, this is not a short sales cycle.
Yeah.
I did one, honestly, I did one last year where it was 7 months, and that's one of the shorter sales cycles that I've had because, and I've equated this is like building a massive domino set, and there's all types of factors that could come and, my domino set's outside, and I've got a different advisor over here. I've got a different cousin or an uncle over here that says, hey, you shouldn't be doing this or whatever. That's the wind, that's the rain that potentially could knock my domino set over. So I just think it's a complete 180 from what I talked about at the beginning of my career, where I did not necessarily was not an expert on the subject matter. But when you
Yeah.
really, really understand the components of this and people can sense that you really understand the components of this, I think that that makes a lot of difference. And at the same time, was there a time, Phil, where I needed to get a deal done to make sure I could pay rent? Yeah, there was, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. I mean, that some of my, early days, my goodness, you're just excited if you came in the light, the door wasn't, I could still, my key still worked and the light still came on. But I think as time moves on and people can sense that, okay, this isn't whether someone does this, and I will politely explain this, like, if you do this or don't do this, it's probably not going to impact I'm not going to change wives. I'm not going to change cars. I'm not going to change homes. It's
Yeah.
not going to have I'm not here I'm here to help you. And I think when people understand that you have their best interests at heart and that you're not going to starve to death if they don't do this, and that they want to take some time and think about it, those are all things that are fine. But ultimately, with people that are in this situation where they have an estate tax concern, they know other people or they've certainly heard stories of other people that have been in that situation. So they're aware. I don't have a single client that does not own a that does not have a family-owned business, and they're well aware. And I've even had people say, "Hey, Darren, I don't need you to tell me what I have at risk here. I've known this for 15 years. I just don't know how to go about it, or I don't know the best way to hedge against this." So, Phil, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's probably the best answer I have for you.
Absolutely. So for you, I think you said it was Greg Rutherford. Is that right?
Yes.
So you you meet him, you think, man, this is a sharp person. I want to learn. Want to be able to grow. Talk a little about, you'd had some success, but you're able to, sounds like, keep the ego down and say, all right, hey, I'm wanting to step into this whole new world. Although it's similar, right? There's a lot of similarities, but it's very different in how the planning is going to be taking place. Talk about, stepping in and becoming the student again to learn
Yeah,
and grow this new area of business.
it was humbling. I'm not gonna lie. It was humbling, and I went from making decent money to no money. Because when I started with Greg, and I think he latched on to me almost as quickly as I latched on to him, not because I knew I didn't know very much, but he recognized that I had a relationship with the legal community because I had a lot of clients in my former in the way I did things before, and then I had the ability to get referrals, and so he latched onto that pretty quickly because as I'm fond of saying, when you get in one of these high level cases, some of these people, they're not going to the bathroom without checking with their lawyer.
Yeah.
So, having the relationships and education pieces with the legal community was important. But I actually spent my first 18 months, and he said, look, uh, at some point I'm going to need to be replaced, and there's no one else here that really does what I do, and I'm not going to be here forever. And I'll make sure that you can pay your bills, and we're going to get you up to speed. But it's not going to take it's not going to happen overnight. And my first 18 months, I made $10,000, and I was personally in the hole at 36 years old to Greg for $82,000. And so I'm panicking and, just, I'm like, okay, how am I gonna get out of this? And he was just as cool as a cucumber. Just keep doing what you're doing. We're gonna be fine. This is gonna pay off. And boy, was he right.
Hmm.
So, but the education piece was not easy. It's, and I've got, my CEP was, it was pretty easy to go through the material and the test because I had a working knowledge of that information. But had I come in cold with that, it would have taken me years to get that done.
Yeah.
So, was not easy, but ultimately, I just didn't realize how hard it was, and sometimes that's okay.
Absolutely. So as you're making this transition, you mentioned, hey, I'm married, we're starting to have kids and grow a family, which adds a whole nother element, right? It's like, hey, if it's just Darren, all right, I can eat ramen noodles, I can, do the peanut butter sandwich thing, been there, done that. We can go back to it. When you have a family that you're providing for, that probably has a whole different feel on the decision making process. So talk a little bit about, making that decision and, support at home or the Darren, what the heck are you doing at home? Conversations that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I explained everything. This is how it's going to, this is what I'm going to be doing moving forward. We're going to have enough money to eat. I even I mean, to give you an idea how thorough the process was, I ended up putting a key person policy on Greg because he was my
Mm.
bank.
Yeah.
So if something happens to him, I'm really in a pickle because there's no other way to get money here. So ended up doing that. But no, I knew I had this blind faith that it would work out, and I've come
Yeah.
up going through that process. I just made sure I didn't know what I was talking about with the lawyers, but I made the decision that I'm going to go before I'm ready here. I'm not going to just try to be an expert on all this. I'm going to go before I'm ready. And I made sure I had the best suits. I made sure I looked polished. I made sure I looked like I knew what I was talking about, even though I didn't really know what I was talking about. But eventually I got there.
Yeah.
And, they don't, you're trying to introduce concepts and things to the legal community that they weren't all that familiar with. They did not have a great understanding of premium finance. They did not have a great understanding of life settlements, and so these are concepts I introduced. I think I had a big part as far as introducing some of these concepts to the Omaha community, and I think Greg had better vision on the whole thing than I did, and that's why he could see how hard I was working, and so yeah, he made a lot of money off me. I made a lot of money off him. And when he retired, it was just like, okay, this sucks, but what are you gonna do?
Yes. So maybe that is our launching pad to, capital smart tax strategies. Talk a little bit about, the decision to then open really, I mean, your completely own thing outside of, Teddy Rutherford.
Yeah, so it was May of 2024. I had worked very, very hard to complete a case. I spent multiple trips, some where you fly out and you come back the same day to the
Yeah.
day. It's just this talk about not being sustainable. And so as we got down to the end, I'm like, okay, I need to take a little time off here and I need to regroup and I need to, because the way I kind of hit a rut of the way I was doing things. This is not sustainable, very similar to what happened in 2001. And so I came home and I got the deal done. I came home. My wife was here and I just said, I think I'm just going to take the summer off. Let's take the summer off. Let's travel. Let's do this. Let's do that. And I just need to kind of reset here. I'd never done that before. And 31 years of doing this, I had never done anything close to that before. But it turned out to be a very valuable exercise because, the old saying, if something's not working, just unplug it for a while and then plug
Mhm.
it in. Eventually, it'll probably start working.
Yeah.
We're no different. And so just having that time to be able to just just to decompress a little bit to help me think through some things. And then at that same time, a group in Austin, Texas, Lion Street, got a hold of me and said, "Hey, we got your name for such and such. We're looking for, I don't, they called it high level life insurance producers.
Yeah.
I'd had connections in Minneapolis where they were looking to expand, and they had one connection here in Omaha that you know, with a gentleman that was, was probably winding down. So it just seemed to be a good fit. So my wife and I went down in September of 2024 for a little dog and pony show that they had. And I was just really impressed with the level of professionalism and a little bit older group of gentlemen and I've I've said some of the guys they look like Cary Grant when he was 70, just great suit, great pockets wear, great smile, perfect hair, and I was like, okay, this is where I want to be. And then so I ultimately decided to start my own firm where focuses on really three things. 98% of it is premium finance cases, life settlement
Yeah.
cases, and then I've started to dabble in the private placement life insurance market, which is maybe the coolest tool out there, for lack of a more dignified way to put it. It's just the education piece is really challenging, as particularly in the Midwest, where people are probably a little more conservative.
Hmm. So as you've, expanded into, having a presence in Minnesota, having your presence in Omaha, that's opened up different doors to speak across the country and to present because you are an expert in a very niche spot. So just kind of looking at that, talk about some of the speaking that you
Mhm.
do and, what really you're educating on. I mean, I know you've kind of alluded to it a couple times, but just, dive a little into that.
Yeah. Well, I'm off the speaking tour for all the
Yeah.
reasons, just the travel, and it's funny because when you're in college or end up, you're contemplating your career and be like, it's be so glamorous to do all this traveling, all that. Yeah, right. Get stuck at that Hilton for the in at O'Hare with the 1973 carpet. Get stuck there, overnight. How many freaking times you're like, this sucks, and I'm away
Yeah.
from home and all this other stuff. But 2004, 2005, 2006, I traveled extensively within trust departments, with insurance agencies, and I've said I talked everywhere from Beverly Hills to New York City to Boca Raton to Portland and just about everywhere in between, because the life settlement concept and the premium finance concept were just really starting to get going. And
Yeah.
people had read about it, they'd heard about it, but they didn't really understand. Well, by that time, I had pretty strong knowledge of the components of the process and why you should do it and what's available. And so, just speaking opportunity, and this is nothing I was paid for, but it was great marketing for me, and that's why I've been able to do so many cases, all over the country. And now, since 2024, when it's just like I got tired of traveling, trying to keep that somewhere between Minneapolis and Omaha, just because. again, the child can eat you alive. So, but I love the speaking, met some great people, and opened up some really, really nice cases.
Amazing.
Who doesn't
Now
like to listen to themselves talk about what they know? I mean, who doesn't like to hear themselves talk?
that's right, that's right. Now, as you have, had some great success in your career, I think, an interesting element is then, all right, well, how do I instill some of those values and principles that made Darren who Darren is from his childhood and from his sporting career? How do you instill those into the next generation, your children? And so, talk a little bit about that for you as a parent, understanding that it's the hard things in life that are going to, really probably boost you later on in life. But as a parent, I never want to see my kid go through the hard thing because, well, they're my kid. I want them to not have to deal with this
Yeah.
difficult situation. So, talk a bit about what you've tried to instill in your children to give them, a catalyst for career success and career growth as well.
Yeah, so Coach Brown he had an expression that he would instill with all the wide receivers, and he talked about it repeatedly. And um, as players, again, 19, 20, 21 years old, you're like, here comes the numerator denominator story again. Um, but incredibly valuable advice. And when I saw him not that long ago, I told him, like, I have told my kids this so many times, and it's like my mother telling me to stand up straight when I was little. God, I hated that. But now as an adult, you're like, it's the best advice I ever received. So what I have told my children over and over and over, you are going to be given a certain denominator in your life that is God given. You cannot control this. Some people are tens, some people are sixes, some people are fours. You have no control over the ability that you've been given. What you do have control over is the numerator that goes into that denominator. If you're a
Wow.
four, I don't, you know, and that's truly the best that you can do. Believe me, we're going to find that four somehow, some way. If you're a six, we're going to find a six. And I've always taught, this is good timing with March Madness, but I've always picked on Chris Webber when it comes
Mm.
to this because Chris Webber was given a 10.
Yeah.
To the guy he just mentally, I mean, needless to say, calling a timeout at the end of the, national championship game. But I lived in Washington D.C. for 2 years, so I saw Chris Webber play a lot. It's just like this guy's leaving so much on the floor. It's just he's not
Yeah.
filling in his denominator. So I've always picked on him, even though he did have a successful NBA career.
Yeah.
But and I've told I still have a 14-year-old here that's going to start at Millard West next fall, and it's like, look, the goal is not to make you a starter in high school. The goal is not to make you a player in college. It's not to get to the NBA. The only goal that we have is to fill in whatever your denominator is. If
Mm.
you fill in your denominator, believe me, you're going to be able to walk away and say, hey, I did everything that I could, and you can live with that.
Yep.
The problem a lot of the time, and I was one of those people in college, you get distracted. There's a
Yeah.
lot of distractions once you get to college. And did I fill in my denominator properly in college as a college football player? No, I did not.
Mm.
So that is something is tough to live with. And I've moved past it, but when it's done, I still remember my last practice taking my stuff off. It's like, and you knew it. I knew it. I knew it in that moment. You did not do everything that you could to fill in your denominator, even though I heard Coach Brown say this over and over. So hopefully that failure has catapulted to my children to help them fill in their denominators.
That's really good. And, one thing I'd love to hear your insight on too is I think so frequently there are certain distractions that you just inherently know, like, I shouldn't have said yes to this, or I shouldn't have gone and done that. Like, that was a boneheaded decision. That was a dumb distraction. But there's others that are shiny objects, but they're not. If you don't have a clear North Star or a clear, direction that you're trying to move in, they seem like the right thing. And when you really are, focused on what it is you truly want or where you want to go, so many of those shiny objects you see right through it and you say, oh no, that's just like the gold flaking, right? That's not actually a gold object, right? It's just gold flaking. I just need to keep going. But how for you have you done that over your career? I mean, you've had probably so many different opportunities to join different companies or to do different business deals. And some of them probably looked really attractive from the outside, but, to your point earlier, 5 years later, you look back and you're like, "Thank God I didn't never go and do
Yeah,
that thing."
yeah.
But, how have you kind of used that as a decision-making, tool along your career?
Yeah, I don't and I've told people, this a lot, something happened when I hit 50. I never thought about it. I didn't consciously make this decision. And I think a lot of people listening that are over 50, 50 or over can relate to this. You learn to stop sugarcoating. You
Yes.
learn to say no quickly and politely, and you just stop really caring what anyone else thinks. So there's four things, and this did not come from Coach Brown. Believe it or not, this came from a former hockey player, football player, baseball player that couldn't hit a curve. I've tried to. There's only four pillars in my life that I'm focusing on, and you know, whatever anyone's beliefs are, I call my four F's: your faith, your finances, your fitness, and your family.
Hmm.
If it's and not necessarily in that order, but if
Yeah.
anything is outside of one of those four pillars, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't help my physical fitness, if it doesn't help me with my family, if it doesn't, you know, if it's not helping my faith, if it's not helping I'm not going to do it. And the I do like Facebook, and I'm happy to keep in contact with my former teammates. But one of the apps is not Facebook. So and God bless other people with their St. Patty's celebrations, but those days are long gone, and teach their own. So,
I love it.
but no, it used to be hard because you're like, "Ah, I don't want to be. No, I don't care what you think, and I'm not doing this.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Darren, I want to say thanks so much for being on today and just sharing your journey and all the amazing things you've accomplished and are accomplishing. And excited to continue to watch it. And we'll probably be doing this again in like 3 years and highlighting, all the new things you're doing at that point.
Please, I'll probably look a little older, a little grayer, a little fatter, a little more pathetic, but we'll do the best we can.
I love it.